Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of The Science Show with Dr. Dada on Jambo Radio, Scotland, broadcasting from the city of Glasgow. Of course, I am Dr. Adetunmise Dada, and I am so happy to be here today talking about everything to do with STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That's, of course, what this show is going to be about. We'll be exploring science, technology, the advances in these areas, and especially the implications for everyday living. And that's why on today's show, we'll be having an interesting topic. Drum roll, please. The topic today will be parasitology. Parasitology and You. So, what's this all about? Of course, parasites are microorganisms that rely on host organisms for their survival. Sometimes that relationship can be harmful to the host, sometimes maybe not so much. But this takes me back to the days in biology class when we talked about parasites. And I can assure you today we'll be talking about something that's much more than just biology. We'll be talking about scientific research, we'll be talking about technology, and more to come. So let's just do a quick run through of what we have in store for today's show. So as usual, we'll be starting with our science news highlights, so where we'll be considering some interesting topics and highlights from news from all over the globe. And then we will introduce our guests. We'll be having some special introductions of our guests today. And then after that, we'll be having a discussion about parasitology. We'll be talking to our guests about their research, and the title of one of our discussions will be From the Lab to the Clinic. So that will be a very interesting chat that you wouldn't want to miss. And then after that, we'll be enjoying some science jokes. So we'll be playing some games with metaphors and similes and having fun with science-related subjects. And today, of course, we'll be focusing on parasitology. And then toward the end of the show, we'll be getting a little bit creative as well. We will be kind of trying to make a song or a rhyme about what we'll talk about today. So that will be fun. So you won't want to miss that freestyle too. Great, that's fantastic. I honestly can't wait for today's show. I can't wait to get to know our guest for today, who is Dr. Priscilla Ngotho. So would you like to say hello to our viewers for a short time?
Hello everyone, my name is Priscilla Ngotho, PhD, and I'm from Kenya originally, doing research in malaria in University of Glasgow.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And I understand that you're from the School of Immunity and Inflammation.
Yes.
Is that the case?
Yeah, School of Immunity and Inflammation, formerly Triple I.
Okay.
We missed the old name.
Yeah, I see, Triple I. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, of course, today we're going to be learning a lot about the science behind specifically tackling parasites, specifically malaria, isn't it? Parasite causing malaria. And in fact, not just malaria, but the deadliest form of malaria, I understand. So, great. That's fantastic. Can't wait to get into discussions on your personal story as well as your research. But for now, let's get into our science news highlights. Okay, so today we have a couple of headlines that actually caught my eye, and a lot of them are related to today's topic, of course. So the first one is about polio. Of course, there's a lot of concern, isn't there, in the news all around the world about the re-emergence of polio, isn't it? So the first headline says, US doctor issues warning of many undiagnosed polio cases. The second one is almost something that looks like good news. It says researchers have discovered a new weapon against drug-resistant malaria, and it's basically thank you very much for that. It's basically a kind of self-destruct button. Perhaps Priscilla can shed some light on that for us as well. And then the third point, some viruses make you smell tastier to mosquitoes, apparently. Honestly, I can't wait to hear what that's about. And finally, why vaccination against malaria quickly loses its protective effect. So some results of research that's come out recently. Okay, so let's delve into the first one. US doctor issues warning of many undiagnosed polio cases. So apparently, a New York State medic says that there could be hundreds or even thousands of infected people out there infected with polio. And parents are being advised to get their children vaccinated to help protect against this deadly disease. Perhaps, Priscilla, so what's really going on here? It seems, of course, polio being a parasite-based infection as well. Is that right? It looks like, something from a bad movie almost, isn't it? Because I remember growing up, all you heard was polio eradicated, right? It felt like, that's in the past and it belongs to history. But could you shed more light on that? What's really going on with that?
So, unfortunately, vaccines, which are the best way to control disease, infectious disease, are too successful to their own detriment. So people say the vaccinations are successful enough to eradicate or eliminate a disease, therefore the disease is not a threat. Therefore, people don't need the vaccination anymore until the disease reemerges. So, for instance, with polio, we have seen mostly in Africa, where it was really not eradicated for a long time, and the paralysis that it causes. So everybody in our generation knows how bad polio is. Let's say 10, 20 years, we don't have polio anymore. It's a myth. It's like, what was this polio? And it's not there anymore. Yes. And you're giving me a vaccination against a thing I can't see. Yeah. So I can understand how it can reemerge. Its diagnosis is slow because it's not an ongoing disease that they look out for. And it takes a longer time to manifest the symptoms. Yes. Yeah, so I can see how that can be a problem. Yes. And it's measles as well is happening in the US as well. Yeah. Measles outbreaks. And this will happen the more we eradicate diseases by vaccination.
Yes. Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? In fact, one aspect of that article that caught my eye from the BBC was vaccine-derived polio. And I thought, hang on a second, that's exactly what you're explaining now, isn't it? Yes. So the fact that people are vaccinated means that they get complacent. They feel like, well, actually, do I really need this vaccination? I'm going to say no to it. And then that starts the disease starts to get a chance again, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully things get under control again on that. The next headline that we'd like to highlight is the self-destruct one. So basically, researchers have discovered a new weapon against drug-resistant malaria, which is kind of good news, right? I think what really caught my eye in this news item on Science Daily, actually, is that, it says that hundreds of millions of people are still being infected globally with malaria each year. That's really scary, isn't it? For a disease that's been around for so long.
Yeah.
How's that possible?
So it's malaria is very infectious in terms of we have so many mosquitoes, and it's impossible to completely protect yourself from mosquito. Malaria in general can be mild. So severe malaria is rare, but malaria is common, especially where we come from in Africa. Everyone knows how malaria can be mild. It's like, oh yeah, I had malaria 2 weeks ago, I was in bed and I came out. So we become almost not very concerned about it, then give it a chance to spread more. We also live in a place that is, tropical, it's warm, it's perfect for mosquito breeding. So it's one of the most common infections to catch. It's not that difficult to see. And because it does not scare us as much as it should until it happens to you, and you lose a child or a loved one, we're not really scared of malaria that much. So we are also complacent a little bit with the measures. Yeah. And once you have a fever, you feel like I can sleep it out and not go get treated immediately. So then that means the disease will continue spreading. Yeah. So I think there's several problems. And the most important thing is poverty. Because it's a disease of poverty, you can imagine not as much resource has been put in malaria as you've seen in COVID and other cases. Yeah. So instead of like catching up, with technology and putting that to preventing malaria, it's still lagging behind a little bit, sort of neglected. So it's probably why it's still very widespread.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for clarifying that, because I was wondering what's really going on here, But the good news here is that the researchers identified an anti-malarial compound, ML901, which inhibits the malaria parasite but does not harm the host, which seems, good news, isn't it? So it's a drug that kind of turns the parasite against itself and offer an effective treatment for malaria. So more on that in the journal Science and on Science Daily. Great. What about the next one? The next highlight, the headline says, some viruses make you smell tastier to mosquitoes. Now, I when I saw this, I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to ask. I have a lot of questions on this. Because one thing is that, I grew up in Nigeria as well, in Africa, and I'm no stranger to mosquitoes. So one thing I noticed though is if we're in a room, if there's 100 people in that room, and there's maybe 10 mosquitoes, I'm going to get beaten by all 10 mosquitoes. So someone said, oh, you must have a scent that attracts mosquitoes. But I always thought that was, come on, that can't be right? That's just, you're just teasing me, But is this really the case? Is this really true that it's possible to have a scent that actually attracts mosquitoes?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm the opposite of you. We could be here and there's no mosquito that will come after me.
I see.
So there's a lot of research and there's a lot of knowledge now. We assume mosquitoes are insects and they're very rudimental, but they have a really sophisticated nose or sense of smell because, they live in the air and they're small and they can travel far from wind. They need to home in on a scent and find their food. So the ones that feed on humans, there are things that will attract them, including your body temperature. So if you're a warmer person, of course, that's the first thing they see, the amount of CO2 you produce. And then once they've homed in into that body, then they look for the other cues, like some volatile compounds, like amino acids and other scents, which they're still trying to map which is which.
Yeah.
People say socks, so smelly feet, and different people have different smelly feet.
This is good to know. I'll take notes.
So if you have socks in a place, we see mosquitoes tend to congregate there, and there's a lot of research looking into what makes you attractive to a mosquito. So this with the virus, which I have to say, I wouldn't be surprised because a viral infection makes you smell different. So you have more immune response, antibodies, immune responses to fight that infection. And this can add to the scent that you're producing. And the mosquito might think, oh, here's a person who's maybe unwell and won't beat me up so much, so I can just go and feed without being, killed or squished. That's just my own opinion, but it's definitely a possibility. The good thing is if we can find out what that is, we can use it in mosquito traps, for example, for elimination.
Fantastic. Thanks for shedding light on that. That's really, really helpful. What about alcohol? Do you know if alcohol has an effect on? Because I know, that's something a human can smell already. Do you think mosquitoes sense things like that, or?
So there's research, but the data is very sketchy. It's human research is difficult to make conclusive comments on. But there was something saying that the more people who drank were more likely to get infected. Meaning they got bitten more.
Okay.
But now we don't know if it's the mosquitoes, they prefer their blood soaked in alcohol type of drink, or is this people who are drinking outside in the evenings where mosquitoes can bite.
Exactly.
And
so
if you're a bit drunk, you were not very quick to respond, so you let the mosquitoes bite for longer. I don't know. I wouldn't use alcohol as a preventative measure though for mosquito.
Yeah, it's so many factors that go into these sort of studies, isn't there?
Yeah.
Fantastic. And I thought, so in that actual report, it says that the viruses that actually alter the scent are Zika viruses and Zika and dengue fever viruses. So it says that they did this test on mice. So they showed that it altered the scent of mice and humans that were infected. And the title of the paper actually made me laugh. It said, a volatile a volatile from the skin microbiota of flavivirus infected hosts promotes mosquito attractiveness. I thought it was expressed in an interesting way. So, of course, a lot of terminology that I don't understand necessarily. But I just thought the mosquito attractiveness was a little bit funny. Of course, that is published in Cell this year, 2022, recently. So if you're interested, you can have a look at that. So now, this we're going to discuss on later in the show during our discussion section. Why vaccination against malaria quickly loses its protective effect. So you said one or two things about that already. But I think the highlight here is that scientists from the German Cancer Research Center, they found out a reason why they think this is the case, and hopefully that gives an opportunity to curb that problem. So we're going to talk more on that later on. So now, speaking about your malaria fighting activities, I know not all heroes wear capes, but I think people who work in your field are heroes in some ways. But before we go into that, let's get to know you as a person. So Dr. Priscilla Ngotho, as a person, we'd like to know some things about your background, your family life, your early education. So let's start with your early life then. So where were you born, and what was your early life, your first years of life like?
So I'm from Kenya, and those who know Kenya, they might know that there's provinces. One of the provinces is actually in the Rift Valley that runs across from almost north to south of Africa, the Great Rift Valley. So I was born in a small town, not so small, a town called Nakuru, in the Rift Valley near the most beautiful magical lake called Lake Nakuru, full of flamingos and a beautiful game park. So I grew up for the first maybe 16 years of life in Nakuru. It's semi-urban, so it's not rural and it's not very urban. It's a mixture of both. Wow. So I was exposed to the both challenges of semi-urban and semi-rural environment, including infectious diseases from a very young age. So I think I might have been inspired by how sick I got a lot often from this mixed environment, Then I just became more curious about how the animals and human bodies work.
I see. That's fantastic. And your early education then, did you start getting an interest in science in school while you were in Kenya as well? Did you show that interest in your education?
Yeah, I think so. So also it happens that the thing you're good at, also you tend to think you like it, so it could be that. I did well in sciences. I enjoyed biology and chemistry. I enjoyed plants and animals as well. I liked to play doctor to plants and animals and give them droplets of medicine. Nice. So I was definitely nurtured because parents saw it. And they bought more textbooks, information, and linked you up with people who like science and science shows. And then in school, it was clear that we were interested in science. I was put in science clubs. I always did relatively well in sciences. Not so great in languages, not so great in maths, unfortunately. But it's in the end, it was mostly biology that I was confident in. Yes. I took mostly science subjects in primary and high school.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. And in your undergraduate studies then, is that something that you did in Kenya as well, or did you? Oh, I see.
Yes.
So which university was it then?
Kenyatta University. So this is the second biggest after University of Nairobi.
Okay.
So this was coincidentally, I didn't get selected for the course I wanted in university, and because I was maybe wanting to chase a little bit of money, I selected business management.
I see.
So when the results came in, and just talking to advisors no, you're not good in this. Maths is maybe not ideal. You're geeky about science. So then I opted to change, and I selected BSc Biochemistry.
Nice.
And specialized in biotech.
I see.
Yeah.
Biochemistry is quite technical as well, isn't it? It's deep, and I thought you did some mathematics as well there, didn't you?
Yeah. So we had to do some. So what they say is biochemistry is medicine without anatomy. So
I see.
yeah, we did basic math. We did some inorganic chemistry, which seems a bit out of bio and chemistry. Yeah, we had to do sorts of like some calculus type of. I'm not sure how useful it is for me in my career,
I see.
but it's just good to have, like, you cannot regret learning. But yeah, so biochemistry, the advantage is very wide. So you can venture into, say, parasitology, microbiology. You can go into food chemistry,
Bioinformatics. Maybe?
bioinformatics as well. Yeah. You can go into computational biology. So
Nice.
the option that was really hot at the time was biotech, when we were starting to think of genetic editing, GMO for food, GMO for just making life better. So I went into biotech.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. And at what point did you realize, okay, I'm going to become a scientist? How old were you?
I think maybe I don't even say I'm a scientist now. It's just a thing I've always done. So I don't think there was an actual realization, yes, I am a scientist. It's I like to discover, I like to research, I like to really read and get nerdy about things. And I've always been like that.
I see.
So I think maybe definitively when I was doing my undergraduate and I was placed in laboratories, and I realized there's a career called research scientist.
Yes.
And that exposure made me realize you can work in a lab for a living. It was like, this is the best thing ever. So yeah, I think it was maybe not an actual realization, but just a thing I've always done. So yeah, it's not a clear answer, is it?
No, it is actually. It is. Thank you very much. Thank you. And the reason it's a nice answer, the answer is that you've always been, you've always known, although not explicitly, you've always known that you're going to be a scientist. You've always been a scientist, a way of life.
Yeah.
And is there any specific person who inspired you?
Yes, most definitely. So my maternal auntie, who is the sister of my mother, is vet. Is a vet surgeon, but she did a PhD in neurology because she was looking at a specific parasite in pigs that was making them a bit nuts. So it was trying to understand why we lose, animals to some viral diseases and infections. Yeah. And then she went into kind of research, but she did not actually stay in research per se. She went into industry and started working with communities and actually left academic research. But she had introduced me to what it's like to study a thing that you can't see.
Yes.
And to really study and understand it in a way that, it becomes almost as well as how to eat and drink.
Yeah.
And I thought, if she could do that, she looks like me, she's from my tribe, we know where we come from. She could read and study and do a PhD, that I probably can. So by the time I was going to undergrad, I kind of knew I was going to follow the career. And, I was used to say, I have to have a PhD by this time to be able to start science research. So I was emulating her. But along the journey, so I met like my lecturers in undergraduate, very specific lecturer. It's called Dr. Masiga. He's a well-known parasitology in Africa.
Shout out to Dr. Masiga.
Yes, we have to mention Dr. Gichuki. She's currently Dean of the University of Meru for Science and Tech. She's my auntie, who is kind of the inspiration for me to study science. Yeah. And then after that, I met very many mentors along the way. And the most influential still is called Professor Kevin Marsh. He's a well-known malariologist, founded the Kemri Wellcome Research Center in Kilifi, and is just an outstanding mentor. And currently I have Professor Marty, who is my current supervisor, PI as we call, principal investigator, and is kind of my boss. He's really passionate about research and the translational angle of, we're not just in the lab, how can we use this for communities? So along the way, there's always a new inspiration. And once you think, I've reached a place where I know what I'm doing, then a new light comes through in form of a person, and they carry you to the next part of your journey. So yeah, it's too many people to mention.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. That's fantastic. Really, really liked hearing the names from Kenya as well.
Yes.
So many heroes there, aren't there?
Yeah.
Great. This is the Science Show with Dr. Dada on Jambo Radio Scotland, broadcasting from the city of Glasgow. So we're having a very interesting discussion with Dr. Priscilla Ngotho, getting to know her, and we later on we'll be talking about her research activity as well. But let's just carrying on that topic. I wanted to ask, what has your experience of being involved in STEM been, growing up in Kenya? So obviously you started your studies in Kenya. What was that like?
It was a bit unusual. So during my time, there was not a lot of women doing science. Actually, science as a career was not a thing as such, but as for women, it was really, really few. So we were kind of different because, the pioneer was my auntie who went into sciences and something like that. But it was not a normal career track. So a lot of the times people are a bit confused. It's like, what will you do then? So there was always that challenge of, even I, for a long time, didn't know what that was. So I thought, maybe I'll become a lecturer and then go from there. So that was one of the goals. When I went to undergrad, we were a class of 41 with only eight girls. So again, in that was also more challenging to feel that you can, a lot of the professors were men and a lot of successful researchers were men, and additionally were white men as well. So it was difficult to see yourself in a research environment and research position. But then as you got into it and you realize it's not men and women, they're just people. They're people who stuck with it and, forced their way into in that world. And if you want to, you should just go and try. And there was no one who said, no, you can't do this job. It was all because I hadn't seen anyone like me. I was like, oh, maybe I can't, but it was all in a voice in my head. So the more now I'm in STEM in higher level, then I can see some form of barriers.
Yes.
A lot of barriers if you're from Africa, because we don't have the scientific research capacity, not as much. We also don't have a lot of the critical mass. So there's not a huge community of, say, parasitologists in Kenya.
Indeed, yes.
And finance, it's not cheap. It's expensive. So you need to put in more resources, like including taxpayers' money, because it does make a difference and it can alleviate, problems and make life better. But so the challenges that were there since I was young are still there, where there's a visibility of certain types of people and it's not as fancy, so there's not so much resources into it. It's still a working challenge that every point you reach is a bit harder to go to the next point because of the same barriers.
Yes, indeed. Wow, it's a completely different research area to from what I'm used to, like what my field is in. So it's really interesting to hear these perspectives. So in your research field, what's the most prestigious prize that one could dream of getting?
I think it's the same as in your field, is the Nobel. So the Nobel Prize in maybe as medicine or chemistry. I mean, recently it's been actually biologists who've won, at least with the CRISPR-Cas, this gene editing technology. There's a malaria lady, she's called 2UU, who discovered atomycin, which is the compound that we still use as frontline treatment for malaria. So the dream actually is usually a Nobel Prize. But it's always very prestigious if you can make a vaccine, even more so because you won't get maybe just the prize, but you actually get to affect people's lives and save lives.
Yes.
So I think, for me, the goal is, can we get a vaccine, or can we get something we can put into people and make them, bulletproof to malaria, more than if I get a Nobel Prize, yay, but, more to save the lives and to make a difference in health.
Oh, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that with us. And do you have any other interests, hobbies, perhaps?
Yes. So besides sciencing, I also like running.
Sciencing, I like that.
Yeah, I'm from Kenya, so I like to run a little bit here and there. Not as good as the Kenyans who are winning medals, but I do like travel and sports. I love food. I love food and drink. This is my real passion, just food and drink. So I like to explore food restaurants, pubs, and things like that. I like to go to food fairs. I like to try different cuisines. Africa is so rich, so we're already quite spoiled, but it's good to try world cuisines. So I like that, and I like a good puzzle. So I like cryptic puzzles. I've got like the Times cryptic puzzles that I do like every morning just to get the brain confused or at least trained.
Yes.
And yoga, of course.
Yeah.
For calming yourself down.
Great. Fantastic. So now we've come to the section of our discussion about a spotlight on parasitic diseases. So what we want, really, the goal here is to help our listeners understand a little bit more about how immunology works, how parasitic, especially in the case of parasitic diseases. Of course, with the COVID pandemic, there's been a lot of information on how viral diseases work and how the vaccines work and so on.
Yeah.
But with parasitic infections, it's a little bit different, isn't it?
Yes.
So, the highlight, news highlight that I'd like to focus on is the one that says why vaccination against malaria quickly loses its protective effect. So, what's your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that? How would you explain that in plain language?
Okay. Can I confess that I haven't read that article?
No problem. It's a generic. It's not specific about the paper, but it's just to understand how these diseases, these kinds of diseases work, and how immunity to them works. Just in a plain language, basically.
Okay, so I think our listeners and a lot of people now know a lot about infection and immunity. So because of COVID, the COVID has to enter your body, go into a cell through the spike proteins binding to your cells, enter into the cell and replicate in your cell, make more copies of the virus, make you really sick. And if you can block the binding of the virus to the cell itself by either doing something mimicking that spike protein or blocking something on the spike protein, then you can prevent the infection from carrying on. So the difference between viruses and larger parasites is the complexity. So what we say a virus is basically a bag of DNA. It literally just has a structure where it's like a cell with a membrane and then DNA. So it's very simple. And all it has to do is find a cell, attach to the cell, inject the DNA into the cell, make little copies of itself. So parasites are a lot more complex. My example is the malaria parasite, which we've known for more than 100 years. And we have one vaccine that we've successfully managed to roll out. Is because besides that it can exist in 7 or 8 different forms in your body, it can also infect different cells and it can go to different organs. So the malaria that is injected in your body by the mosquito is a completely different shape from the one that makes you sick. So the mosquito injects the malaria form that actually is outside of a cell, we call extracellular. Okay. It has to find its way to the liver. It goes to the liver for like 10 days, just growing in the liver, in liver cells, and makes a lot of parasites inside the liver cell. Those are released, go into blood. When that goes into the blood, that's when the chaos begins. That's when you get malaria. That's when you have fevers and sickness, because this is the point where it's making very many copies of itself and overwhelming the host, you as the patient. And all it does is infect red blood cells, grow, become like 10 times more, infect another red blood cell, and keep reproducing until you stop it by either your immunity or medicine, or you actually die. So that is really many steps to try and stop the parasite. So you catch it in the liver where it's quiet. No one even knows they have malaria when it's in the liver. By the time it's in the blood, the amounts are so huge. So trying to treat it at that point is also difficult, and it's really quick replicating. The most deadly one is every 48 hours. It makes 32 more forms of itself.
Wow.
While it's there in the blood, it makes your red blood cells different. they become sticky. They go and stick in the brain. They go and stick in the lungs. You get cerebral malaria because the parasite has sent, itself to the brain and clogged your arteries in the brain. So by the time you're reaching that point, like, it's really hard to send medicine and compounds to all these various organs to treat it.
I see.
Yeah. So the vaccine targets a couple of proteins that enable the parasite to enter red blood cells, or to enter the body. Let's just say. So the proteins are very diverse as well. And the parasite is very clever. So once it sees it's under attack, it can change its clothes and wear a new coat of antigens or proteins. And then your immunity is now can't see it anymore. It's like, oh, this is not the one I was trying to fight because it's changed its look.
Wow.
So if you give it enough time, it can, what we call an arms race. So the more you try and fight it, it's fighting back. It's evolved with us for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's always trying to keep ahead of you. And then in a short while, your vaccination is not working anymore. Exactly what happened with COVID. It evolved and ran away from the immunity established by the first vaccine. So it's a lot more complicated because of so many targets to try and block the parasite.
And that explains why there's so much research that needs to go into developing these drugs. So chloroquine, that's, to me growing up, that's something that you hear a lot as a way to treat malaria. So is that still the case? I mean, being in the UK, for example, I've not heard chloroquine.
No.
Is it still effective against malaria, or is it?
So chloroquine, which we used to call malaria queen growing up, was the standard treatment. And back then we used to treat you with one drug. So we treated people in mostly Africa with malaria queen and chloroquine. And what we did is we flooded the system with chloroquine. So the parasite realized it's under attack. So it evolved to make a mutation where it's able to spit out the chloroquine as quickly as you're putting it in. So it became quite resistant very quickly, and the resistance spread. Because under natural environment, if you don't evolve and you're under selection by drug, you die off. So in the end, by treating more, we actually spread the chloroquine resistance. So now it is not first line of treatment. And we are no longer giving single dose treatment or single molecule treatment. We always try and treat malaria with combination to prevent evolution of resistance. Because if you give it one compound, it can
focus on that.
Yes, exactly. It will quickly change. But if you're confusing it, you've given it 2 or 3 drugs. If the first one doesn't get it, the second one will get it. By the time it's evolved resistance to all 3, buys us time. But it's just a matter of time before it evolves. So currently we use artemisinin combination therapy, ACT, as the first line of treatment for malaria.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting. And in the UK, is it still a problem? Do people get malaria in the UK? Do you know?
So they call imported malaria. So it's usually travelers who've gone abroad and come back with an illness. There's no transmission in UK. We don't have the right environment for the mosquitoes. So the human-to-human transmission does not occur currently. So with global warming, if the environment is fine and mosquitoes can exist here, it's just a ticking time bomb. So we know, like previously, there was malaria in Italy, there was malaria in most places. So it wasn't as high as in Africa. It was a lot easier to eliminate. Indeed. But the way that things are going and the trends are going, if we get that mosquito that can live in tropical country, being able to live in these cold countries, and people here are not immune to malaria, it can be really devastating if it is managing to start getting spread here from human to human. So a lot of European countries are lucky that and Western countries, they don't have the right environment, so they don't have it as a problem. They're tourists, they're soldiers, and all these things, they are at risk when they go to African countries. So remember to take your anti-malarials when you go on holiday.
So we've heard it from the doctor. Something else I've always been wanting to ask, is to do with, how there's the hemoglobin genotypes.
Yes.
So people from Africa will probably be aware of sickle cell disease, and so people have the hemoglobin genotypes of AA, AS, AA being the normal one, and AS being the carrier, and the SS being the kind of the disease one.
Yeah.
So my question is there any relationship between whether you're AA or AS and your susceptibility to, getting malaria?
Yes, so this is one of the best models for selective evolution. So malaria it seems, was the biggest killer of people in Africa. So this mutation to have the sickle cell gene, where your red blood cells are not as, normal as people's, biconcave shape, the normal shape of a red blood cell. They turned into literally like sickle, like a C type of form. And this form, it does not support the growth of the parasite very well. So the problem is, if you have normal blood, normal hemoglobin, AA, you're vulnerable to malaria. If you have SS, which is the double allelic the gene for both of the copies of your DNA have the sickle cell form, then you can get crisis of sickle cell, and they don't live very long either. So the balance is, if you're half and half, you have one normal allele and one sickled allele, because you're more resistant to malaria, but you also don't die of the sickle cell, because the disease itself is very devastating. It's almost as bad as malaria. So there was like a balancing selection. So there's a lot of this phenotype of AS, or this type where you're kind of half sickle and half normal, you're really protected from malaria, and you also don't get very sick with sickle cell anemia.
I see, that's interesting. Because I remember hearing that growing up, and I thought, that's one thing I would like to ask you. Fantastic. So now let's move more into your own research, your activity here in Glasgow and at the University of Glasgow.
Yeah.
So how would you define parasitology for a non-scientific audience?
So it's the study of organisms that depend on the host for survival. So they mostly are not good. They're what we call pathogenic, or they will cause a health implication to the host.
Yes.
So that generally is the study of these living things that have to rely on a host for their existence. So the parasitology we study is definitely of clinical importance. It's not just normal parasitology. So we're looking at living things that live inside other organisms and cause them health harm. So in the University of Glasgow, this umbrella covers everything from malaria, which is the one that we know, to worms, helminth worms, like tapeworms, roundworms, those gut type of worms. So these are really huge. You can hold them in your hand. Parasites to really microscopic ones that you can't see with your eye. It covers the whole range, and it's human and animal, so of human and veterinary health significance. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so in your study, like in your research, how does that go on, your daily sort of routine of research? Like what does it look like?
So I study the malaria form that goes to the mosquito. So our idea is we want to prevent, so we know mosquitoes spread malaria, but if the human was never infected, the mosquito never gets infected. So actually humans infect the mosquito one way or another. And the mosquito the malaria cannot live in the mosquito that long. We humans are the reservoirs. We are the ones harboring the parasite. So what I try to do is understand all the cell mechanisms of the forms that go into the mosquito, and how the human body can identify them and fight them. So my day-to-day work is growing these small parasites. They're microscopic. We grow them in human blood. So we have to request blood from NHS, and they're usually very generous. They give us blood every week. We grow our parasites in blood and serum from, almost like your body, but in a test tube, as we would say for laymen. And we put them in 37 degrees incubators, almost like a human body. So we are growing them outside of the host. We call that in vitro, not in hosts, not in vivo. So, and then we can isolate the parasite forms that we want. Like I want to look at the one that is going to the mosquito. It's called the transmission form. And I characterize the antigens, how it grows, how it responds to various chemicals and drugs, trying to understand, is there any vulnerability that we can home in and block it from being passed to the mosquito? So curtail the life cycle and block malaria transmission. So that in a nutshell. So I spend most of the time, it's very non-glamorous, in a lab coat with double gloves, in a bloody hood.
Well, that sounds glamorous to me.
I like it. It's good fun, and you look at little microorganisms under the microscope and understand their shape and know when they're happy, when they're unhappy, because you really want to get to know them, like really get to know them in and out. So you know how to make them really unhappy in the human so that they don't jump to the mosquito and transmit to another vulnerable human.
Nice.
Yeah.
And how does your research make it from the lab to the bedside, if you like, to the clinic?
So this is my dream as well. I'm still working on the doing it, but we have an idea. So, for example, we have a couple of targets on the parasite that we know it has to do this thing. It has to do these molecular changes to be able to go into the mosquito. And we can put a specific small compound, like a drug, or we can put an antibody. So we can make a vaccine specific that will block these changes or these forms from growing and maturing and being able to jump. So the first instance is to show that actually is a target and do it in the lab. Once you've done it in the lab, the next step is to try and do it in small animals, to do it in mice. So we are at the point of we would like to finish this piece of research and go into the mouse model or into what we call in vivo live model. And if that is correct, then we can start to think of things we call phase 1 trials, like safety of these compounds and these molecules in a human being. And then in the end, if it goes through all the proper stages of development, then it can go into an approval form of treatment. So we are still really early in the research, but it's a long, expensive process, and you need to be really certain so that you don't waste time and money before you go into human,
Indeed.
Studies. So we really have to get it really clear and complete, and convince the funders that this is something they can back, and convince governments that is something they can go behind, so we can get the support we need to take it to the clinic, to the bedside.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's nice. Thank you very much for sharing with us the journey from the lab to the clinic, to see how that works. Great. So I think at this point we will enjoy a couple of science jokes. It's one of my favorite things. So it's interesting because I'm from a physics background, and the physics jokes are a little bit different from the biology jokes. So it'll be interesting to see what we can share. So do you have any favorite ones? Any favorite jokes that biology or biochemistry based?
Goodness. I'm trying to remember one that I had. I think it was just yesterday, and it was a chemistry joke.
Okay.
It's quite old, but I'll still share.
Sure.
Why are there no any good chemistry jokes? Or why are all chemistry jokes bad? Look, I can't even do it. Anyway, let's start again. Why are there no good chemistry jokes? Mm-hmm. Because all the good ones are gone.
Are gone, all right, okay. So
I can't be a stand-up comedian.
Yeah, no, the thing about science jokes, it's interesting that one of the things that make them funny is the fact that they're dry.
They're
right?
not funny. Yeah, they're so unfunny. So it's funny.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I got that one.
Oh, well done.
So argon. So
argon.
The argon. Okay. So, of course, argon is the element, right?
Yes,
and,
AR.
Chemical element.
Yeah, gone. Yeah.
I found a few as well. So
let's see.
One of them. Why did the biologist and the physicist break up?
Why?
Come on, that's simple, right? Come on. Think about it. Biologists and physicists broke up because they had no chemistry.
Oh my God. Oh no. It's painfully bad.
It's really bad, isn't it? Then what about this one? What did the cell say when he ran into a table?
What did he say?
Mitosis.
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 That's a good one.
Yeah. And another one, why wouldn't the scientists go into the haunted house? This is easy, right? This has
Really?
to be. Well, I think so. Editor,
Okay, why?
it says he was too petrified. Petri dish. Maybe you can
Petri dish.
explain to the listeners why that's funny.
Why it's not very funny? Anyway.
Or why it works as a joke, as a
Yeah.
science joke.
Yeah, because scientists are supposed to be working on petri dishes. So we petrified.
Yeah, exactly. Petrified.
Petrified.
Anyway, you are listening to The Science Show with Dr. Dada on Jambo Radio Scotland, broadcasting from the city of Glasgow. And next, and finally on today's show, we will have the STEM rap or song. It depends. We don't know what we're going to get. But the idea with this section is we're going to try to be creative based on what we've talked about today, which is parasitology, parasitic diseases, the research based on that. So we're going to try to write 1 or 2 lines. It doesn't have to be more than 2 lines, okay? Of a song, maybe a rap or a melody. So, do you want to have a go?
Why not?
Okay, so this is the beat, okay?
Okay.
Thank you, DJ. So, the songwriting process is very simple,
Yeah.
right? So you just try to find the groove.
Mm-hmm.
You can start with, a word and try to think of a word that rhymes with it, or maybe not rhyme with it. Just get into the groove, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you could start with speech,
Yeah.
So, does anything come to mind?
I would use malaria. It's the only thing I know.
Okay, so malaria, then what
But,
else?
yeah, malaria makes you get anemia.
Oh, okay, let's start again. Go, 3, 2, 1, go.
Malaria, makes you get anemia,
Hey.
You don't want to be sick. You want to be okay. You don't want malaria. You don't want anemia.
Woo, that's fantastic. So, malaria. Yeah, that's really cool actually. So basically then you kind of write that down and then get a couple of more lines and kind of make it sort of smooth around the edges, and there you've got it. You've got a song.
Oh, wow.
So let me see if I can recite that. Malaria gives you anemia, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then just keep going.
Yeah.
Oh, another rhyme you could use is when mosquito bites, it gives you the parasite, right? And then, that kind of thing.
I see. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that. That brings us to a close on today's show. And to play us out on today's show, we're actually going to listen to one of Dr. Ngotho's favorite songs, Sweet Child O' Mine by Guns N' Roses. But before that, we'd like to remind you, if you'd like to keep your eye on the advances in science and technology, and especially on the impact these developments have on daily life, or just to learn 1 or 2 facts, here and there about science and related activities in Scotland and from all over the world, well, this is the place to be, the Science Show on Jambo Radio. And next week, we're going to have another special guest on the show talking about nanoelectronics, artificial skin, electronic skin, and applications in robotics. So that's going to be a bumper episode as well. So please email us with your questions and comments on today's show, info@jamboradio.co.uk. And please do check our homepage, www.jamboradioscotland.co.uk, for more information and updates on this show. And we'd like to thank again our special guest, Dr. Ngotho, for visiting us today. And we'd like to also thank our producer, Zainab Aro-Shere, for this show. So tune in to us the same time next week for another exciting edition of The Science Show with Dr. Dada. Until then, stay curious.